Hello, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm sure more people will join us. Hello, and welcome to the fourth session of the Arizona Association for Economic Development's Economic Development 101 for elected officials. I am Carrie Kelly, the Executive Director of AAD, and I'm glad you can join us today for this discussion of transportation and infrastructure and its importance on economic development. I'd like to thank SRP as our series sponsor, and we thank them for allowing us to produce this event at no cost to you. And I'd like to introduce Carla Moran, which is the Senior Project Manager for Economic Development at SRP, and she will introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Today we're talking about infrastructure, and it's such an important part of Arizona and how we grow. Infrastructure is a backbone of our economy, connecting people and business to jobs, goods, services, information, and customers inside and outside the U.S. Access to high-quality infrastructure expands economic opportunity to more communities, improves quality of life, and boosts international competitiveness. Ports, waterways, railroads, airports, roads, reliable electricity, and internet connectivity are critical for the arrival of necessary inputs and delivery of finished products, and thus for creating jobs. Infrastructure equally contributes to achieving a safe, healthy, mobile, and educated workforce. So it's so important for us as we talk about economic development that we include infrastructure. And we want to first start off with a polling question. And what infrastructure would you rank as the most important for economic development? And then Carrie's me putting that up for you. We have roads, railroad, power, gas, broadband, airports, and water. As you're doing the poll, I'm going to introduce our speakers. We have a distinguished set of speakers today representing critical infrastructure in our state. And I would like to introduce the speakers with their impressive bios will be linked in the chat box. First up, we will have Eric Anderson with Maricopa Association for Governments. He's the Executive Director. Second, we'll have Camila Martin Beckett with TEP. Third would be Tim Swan with City of Page. And last, we'll wrap it up with Shay Yoakum from Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport Authority. So I'll kick it over. So first we'll see the results, sorry. Looks like the most important is roads, freeways, and highways. So a good intro for Eric as we kick it over to Eric Anderson, who will start with transportation.
Thanks, Carla. Yeah, that not surprising. You know, transportation is really key to the environment, no doubt about it. Transportation is what we call a derived demand because, you know, you don't go out and say, I want to drive somewhere. Usually you have to, you're going somewhere. You're going from A to B, you're going to go shopping, you're going to go do something. And that's what transportation really allows you to do. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to talk about two aspects of transportation that really matter, and I think in my mind these are the two in the blue box. Those are the two most important things about transportation. Transportation facilities provide access. Obviously, if you have a piece of property, if you have a business, and nobody can get to it, it has no value to speak of. The other aspect of transportation is efficiency. The better a transportation system is, the less congestion there is, the less friction there is, the more efficient the transportation system is. And that means that there's higher productivity, more reliable travel costs or travel times. And what that means for businesses and people too, lower costs, lower commute costs, both direct costs as well as indirect costs like your value, your time. And all that means that the better our transportation systems are, we have greater economic competitiveness. On the access side, once you put a new transportation facility in, it changes the market area served by those properties. And it also allows citizens to go from where they are to where they want to be in faster times. And also results in higher property values. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples of that. So go to the next slide. So we talk about multipliers, and I'm sure most of you have heard about the multiplier. If you spend X, that'll generate economic activity of Y, and Y being something greater than that initial investment. So I'm going to talk about three types of transportation investments. One that has very high multiplying effects, really changes the nature of development or the development profile. a project that has more average multiplying effects, very important, very significant effects, but not quite as high as as the first one. And then another project that has a low multiplying effect. So go to the next slide. So we opened in the MAG region a new facility. The South Mountain Freeway opened another 22 miles of highway in the valley here, and it really fundamentally has changed the development profile of the southwest part of the valley. The southwest part of the valley really has been held back because it lacked good access. Most of it south of the Salt River. Didn't have good river crossings, even though it was 10 or 15 minutes as the crow flies into the central business district. Really didn't have the kind of development activity that you would expect given that kind of proximity to the core of the city. Go to the next slide. But what we've seen is it really has changed the nature of the development interests along the South Mountain Freeway. City of Phoenix sees this as the South Mountain Technology Corridor. In the valley here, we have a lot of high-tech manufacturing industries, Intels of the world, if you will. But most of those are located in the East Valley, and consequently, the labor force associated with those businesses are also located primarily in the East Valley too. Well, what the South Mountain does is link that East Valley labor market to the southwest part of the valley, and so it opens up these kind of development opportunities now in the southwest part of the valley that didn't exist before, because even though the labor market was close by, you couldn't get there because there was no transportation linkage. Go to the next slide. At the same time, it also stimulated a lot of retail and commercial development in the area too. Once again, improved access yields bigger market areas. Go to the next slide. So let me talk about that medium multiplying effect. And I'm going to talk about the impact of light rail. And a lot of people, there's been a lot of criticism of light rail, but once again, I think the citizens, at least in this region, get it. Referendum in the city of Phoenix last summer. A lot of support for the rail program. So we go to the next slide. So one of the most striking examples of what happens when you improve transportation access. There's always been road access on Apache Boulevard, for example. But Apache Boulevard really hadn't changed much since I'd gone to ASU back in the day. We really didn't see the kind of private sector development because US 60, the Superstition Freeway, had been completed to the south, and that redirected traffic away from Apache Boulevard to the Superstition Freeway. When light rail opened up, it really opened up these development opportunities. It made access to properties along the light rail line much more attractive to development. It made these properties have bigger market areas, for example, and all of a sudden you could get from A to B much more quickly and conveniently, and it really has stimulated a lot of redevelopment along Apache Boulevard. Next slide. And also in downtown Phoenix. So, what light rail had done is unlock this trapped land value that we saw, whether it was in downtown Phoenix or along Apache Boulevard or Main Street in Mesa. We've really seen the impact of better connectivity and reliability, easier access, which means you have effectively large market areas. The investments, these numbers are a little dated because the actual numbers are higher now, but $12.2 billion of public and private sector investment, and there's another $4 billion in process. So, once again, unlocking those trapped land values, putting those properties to higher and better use is what it's all about, and transportation really enabled that. Go to the next slide. The last example I'm going to talk about is what we need to do to keep the system moving efficiently. So efficiency is really important in terms of reliability, travel times. If you're a commercial trucker, you have schedules you have to keep, and congestion and unanticipated delays really cause significantly increased costs. So this is we have a project coming up to improve a section of I-10 around what we call the Broadway Curve here in the Valley. Carries over 300,000 vehicles a day. It really is probably the most important critical economic linkage we have here in the Valley, but it has tremendous amount of congestion. So there's a $700 million project to improve this area. It'll increase throughput, increase reliability, and improve safety and capacity. And so although this is not going to have the kind of the game changer impacts that the South Mountain Freeway had, because that was in a completely new corridor, investments to keep moving people and goods moving more efficiently is so important to our economic development and our competitiveness. One of the outcomes of what we've done here in the Valley, because of the our regional taxes we have in place here, we're really very competitive relative to our peer regions relative to congestion. We continually rank toward the lower tier major metro areas in the levels of congestion. But we have some things to work on. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things we need is actually more money for transportation. I mentioned the South Mountain Freeway, $1.7 billion facility, or so 60% of that was paid for out of regional funds. The balance was largely federal funds. And so with the state has not increased the gas tax here in Arizona since 1991. This is a chart that just compares the gas tax generated from the 1991 Taurus, which was the best-selling car back in 1991, versus the Honda Accord today. If you compare the gas mileage and account for inflation, that Honda Civic today generates 70% less revenue, gas tax revenue, to the Arizona Highway User Revenue Fund than that Taurus did. So we're trying to build and maintain a 21st century transportation system, in particular like roads and highways relative to gas tax, based on a 1991 financing model. Just doesn't work at all. And obviously with the, we think there's going to be a shift to higher level of electrification of the fleet. We have to change the way that we collect transportation revenues in the future. So that completes my remarks today. Be happy to answer any questions. I think we're going to do that at the end. Carl, I'll turn it back to you.
I think we'll go ahead and have Camilla up next with TEP.
Great. Thank you so much, Carla, and thank you so much, Eric. My name is Camila Martins-Beckott, and I'm an External Affairs Representative with Tucson Electric Power. Next slide, please. So Carla touched on this in terms of what is infrastructure. And I wanted us to take a minute and kind of pause and think about all of the things that we see on this slide. You know, it covers many things, and they are things that we often don't think about or don't see. I work for an electric company, and we are just one of the pillars associated with the backbone of the economy. Next slide. So when you think about infrastructure, it really is the, not to repeat myself, but the backbone that enables trade, powers businesses, connects workers to their jobs, creates opportunities, and eases challenges. And if you think about that on a macro scale, it's really the necessary input for every economic output. And the infrastructure in economic growth is critical to the prosperity of a community, public's health and welfare. It's also the condition that has a cascading impact on the economy, as Eric just pointed out with the gas tax revenue, impacting business productivity, our local area gross domestic product, employment, personal income, and our competitiveness. Next slide, please. So as an employee of the electric power company, let's talk power and why it's important. There's a reason why I am showing these beautiful pictures of our infrastructure, because it's not often that you look at power lines or transformers and realize what it takes to actually make the light in your house come on, or the light in your business come on. And so we take a minute here to realize that these things are often above our eye level and oftentimes below our eyesight, hidden in the ground, as seen by the bottom right-hand picture. It's a complex business, but we deliver a complex product that is necessary for everyday life. You know, electric infrastructure is not often what makes the headlines when you're talking about an economic development project. We usually make the headlines when the lights go off, but we really are an essential business to economic development. Next slide. So when you think about this, the factors that are important for site selectors when they are looking at a community to relocate or expand their business, right? I've listed the top factors there: availability of skilled workforce, availability of building and land, energy availability and costs, state and local incentives, proximity to major markets, corporate tax rate, labor costs, occupancy and construction costs, quality of life, and highway accessibility. And so when you think about those factors and you think about the question that's on the slide, you know, what is the impact of electrical infrastructure on these factors? And even more broadly, what is the impact of infrastructure on these factors generally? And you realize that the bolded ones are all impacted in one way, shape, or form by infrastructure. And I mean, and we could also make the argument that all of these are. And I bring this up just so that we can realize the impact that infrastructure that is often not seen or thought of as, oh, we can just, you know, let's just build a road here, or let's just add a transmission line here, right? Like these things take time, they take money, and they take consideration, but they are very important to making us a competitive state for business attraction and business development. Next slide, please. So what is important to a site selector or a company that is considering having their business in Arizona generally? Reliability is important. Power quality is really important. Availability of power, and more so these days, the resource mix. And by that, we refer to, you know, what are the sources of your power? More and more, we're seeing that people are interested in learning more about, like, do you have renewables? What are your options for me in terms of battery storage or sited solar? So a lot of utilities, electric utilities in the state are making really bold moves toward higher renewables. For example, TEP just released their IRP, and they are going to be moving to 70% renewable by 2035. APS has made a commitment of 100% renewable by 2050, I believe. And so you see this trend and trying in electric utilities trying to meet the customer's needs so that we can remain competitive and attract businesses to the state. Next slide. So this is my last slide, and this is kind of the think about how it is that this impacts, right? So I'll just read this so that you can kind of think about it. The link between infrastructure and economic development is not a once and for all affair. It is a continuous process, and progress in development has to be preceded, accompanied, and followed by progress in infrastructure. And you know, really what that means is it is a constant thinking of how is it that we set the table right for development in our state? How do we set the table to attract the businesses that we want to attract? How do we support the communities that we operate in? You know, infrastructure and electrical infrastructure are things that sometimes are taken for granted. The things that you don't see or realize that aren't impacted by the activities that are happening above ground. And to ensure that we remain a competitive state, we need to prioritize investments in those infrastructures. You know, we've seen that infrastructure creates and keeps jobs. We've seen that infrastructure attracts and retains a skilled workforce. We've also seen that infrastructure fosters sustainability. And so kind of, you know, part of the point of, you know, this series of seminars to public officials is to give you a broad understanding of all the things that go into making Arizona a competitive state. And kind of the takeaway for me, you is, have an understanding that getting the right infrastructure in place takes time, takes money, and it requires upkeep. We often encounter projects that are looking for a particular set of power requirements, and it's always unfortunate when they pick a particular site that really works for them, and you're like, oh, well, we have this infrastructure issue and this infrastructure issue associated with it. Because it's not really anything that is often observed at first glance. So with that, I send it back to Carla, and thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Camilla. Next, we have Tim Swan with the City of Page. He's going to be talking about broadband.
Good morning, everybody here. I'm Tim Swan. I'm the Community Economic Development Director with the City of Page. For those who don't know what Page is, we're home to Horseshoe Bend, Antelope Canyon, Lake Powell, many other wonderful things here. So for those on the call, there will be in the next several minutes a opportunity for a Zoom selfie here. So stand by and be ready. Next slide, please. So from the city perspective, what is infrastructure? What does it mean to you? So infrastructure fundamentally means so many different things, as we talked about just today, but focusing on three key elements. You have economic development, growth, and education. You can see what we have on the screen here today. You have highways, rails, and ports. That is how people and commerce connect. So some people think that Arizona doesn't have any ports, but if you can take a look at the background on that right-hand side, you see Pinellas Inland Port. Not only do they have infrastructure, but they leverage it. So there are some communities, some represented here today that I could see, that have infrastructure. They're served by rail, and they leverage it by by utilizing something called a foreign trade zone. So I want to harp, it's not just only about having infrastructure, but it's about leveraging it and being competitive as well. What we know about infrastructure broadband, is that it is extremely complicated. So the water delivery system, you have to have expert knowledge in capacity, GPM, pressures, flow, cost, demands. There's so many things. And what does that mean for infrastructure altogether? It is extremely complicated, and it can be burdensome too. So to go back at our inaugural AAED elected official training, we sent out a poll, and the #1 response for the top hurdles that we face here in Arizona per elected officials were infrastructure, followed by broadband. And how important is infrastructure to someone from the city, myself here? Let me go and show you my phone. Next slide here. So for those who can't see, you can hit next. You see water resources engineer here just below mom. So don't tell my dad. But it's extremely important. And what you see nowadays, go ahead and hit next, please. What you see nowadays is there's a buzzword that we're hearing again and again and again. And next slide, that buzzword is broadband specifically. So what is broadband? To simply put, it is being connected through the internet, through telecommunications. And because of the leaps and bounds in broadband and the unimaginable public health situation that we're in right now, the world has flipped on its head. Next slide. So want to put out in the, or sorry, go back one. I guess we skipped the slide. So want to put out in the chat here, WFH. WFH, that is an acronym. For those who know what it means, go ahead and put it in the chat. And for those who know what it means or stands for, what does it mean to you? So there have been studies, 42% more people nowadays have been working from home, and that dynamic has proven to save cost, money, and many other things when it comes to commercial and industries as well. So WFH the acronym stands for work from home. And that can mean things like telecommuting. It can mean other things. So in the chat here, it can mean freedom for some. Next slide. And this is a real ad, work from hotel, WFH. And this is, you know, the society that we're living in with the right infrastructure. You're able to do many different things. Next slide. And this panel here explains and contextualizes our society for many of us right now. If we showed this to someone in 2018, I'm pretty sure they would you know, look at you with a funny face. And it also shows how people are handling things. And I think I aspire to be that person in that top right corner here. Next slide. And this is the photo opportunity for the day and kicks off our flat earth portion of the presentation. So for those who want to take a selfie here and send it to the significant other, it could be a good opportunity to say, you know, what you did today and how important you are. Next slide. And flat earth, not in the literal sense, but in the terms of globalization. And globalization meaning that the competitive playing field between our industries and commercial markets has been flattening, especially with more connectivity and increasing systems. So what does this mean historically? So in the 50s, we had our freeway systems that boomed. We had a survey today that called out freeways, connectivity, highways as, you know, our primary focus point. And if you were not connected back then, you fell off the map. It is extremely important to be connected, and that's where we're going with broadband. As it was pointed out, you know, this year with our educational system, the communities, some of which are on the call today, did not have adequate broadband, and it was like hitting a brick wall. I know this from talking to many personally, and every city had its struggles. Next slide. So in terms of implementation, how do we handle this? Here's a quick little slide and direction for us that the Arizona Commerce Authority, they have taken leaps and bounds and are key stakeholders in our state's initiative to make sure that we are all interconnected. There are increasing state initiatives as well as more and more federal funding opportunities. So for you on the call today, if you want to focus and you don't have adequate broadband, you can leverage things like CARES funding, EDA grants, and other things like that. And there are more and more coming on every single day too. A big key facet in terms of your internal strategy is to pivot and adapt. Society is living the WFH mentality a lot, and it can be a game changer, and sometimes our infrastructure can't handle it. At the end of the day, we rely a lot on partnerships and collaboration, which are happening, what I'm hearing is happening more and more frequently. Before we move on to the next slide, another shout out to the Commerce Authority. For those who don't have broadband and are rural, which many of the attendees here are, there is a rural broadband development grant. You could see there's two parts. One is for infrastructure and B here is for planning. You see some communities that have taken tremendous steps forward, and you know, great job to them. And we hope to see more and more on this list and more remain connected. Next slide. So for those who are connected, there is an initiative, a smart city initiative. What does smart city mean? It's different to everybody, but it typically means ubiquitous Wi-Fi, electrical vehicle charging, smart sustainable electricity, smart thermoses, smart keys, you know, a lot of smart tech there. And not only having it, but again, how do you leverage it again? How are you innovative? How do you use research and development? And our region has been called out as one of the most progressive in that fashion. Next slide. And to conclude here, want to leave everybody on that high level, the economic developer mindset. You know, at the end of the day, all of us here on the call, all city staff, all state representatives, county representatives, everybody all under our umbrella, need to understand that we all need to have that economic developer mindset. That economic development professionals are involved in the development of goals, and they also lead initiatives to bridge that gap to where you currently are and where you need to be. And that concludes my presentation. I want to pass it back to you, Carla. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Next up, and our last would be airports. Shay Yogam with the Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. Not going to repeat most of what the previous panelists say, although I agree with most everything they said. I'm excited to talk about the airport because I think it's a shining example of how important infrastructure is and how it can be leveraged to generate incredible economic activity. So next slide, please. So just very quickly about the airport, many moons ago, about 25 years ago, the airport was an Air Force base, a very, very active Air Force base, one of the more productive training bases in the United States Air Force. And as part of one of the base reallocation acts, or BRAC for short, the base was identified for closure. Now across the country, military installations get closed from time to time, and often they become a significant economic burden. You're typically taking a very significant economic engine and almost overnight shutting it down. In the case of what was formerly Williams Air Force Base, several communities, the city of Mesa, town of Queen Creek, city of Apache Junction, and others stood up and came together and took ownership of the Air Force Base, called it Williams Gateway Airport, and set a really bold vision. They viewed this airport as a potential for an incredible economic engine. It would be a reliever airport to Sky Harbor to serve the growing valley. And it took a while, had to be patient, took about 25 years, but we are really starting to show the capabilities of this airport and realizing that vision. And it took quite a bit of commitment from those communities. They've spent millions and millions of dollars upgrading infrastructure. You know, what was interesting about the transition from the Air Force Base is there was actually quite a bit of infrastructure already here. The runways were in place. The Air Force had built quite a bit of what you see on this aerial in front of you here. But when they transitioned it, they transitioned property with incredible infrastructure without really any revenue streams whatsoever. So what was imperative for the communities when they stood up the authority was to maintain and then further build upon the existing infrastructure. And that was a critical piece and commitment from those communities way back when. I want to talk a little bit about the ownership structure of the airport, primarily to show how necessary collaboration is between municipal jurisdictions, in our example, to actually realize success. So the Airport Authority is actually comprised of 6 different government entities. The City of Phoenix, City of Mesa, Town of Gilbert, Town of Queen Creek, City of Apache Junction, and the Gila River Indian Community all make up the ownership structure of the authority. And each of those owners contributes an amount every year, which is dedicated specifically to infrastructure development. So on the board that I go to every single month, there are 6 mayors and/or lieutenant governors who sit on that board and govern what goes on here at the Airport Authority. Next slide, please. So I'm making the assumption that everyone on the call has flown through an airport, and you probably have some idea of what airport infrastructure looks like. You throw a couple runways, maybe a taxiway or 2 and a terminal, and voila, you've got an airport, maybe a hangar. But what happens at airports across the country, the very first critical step in infrastructure development that every airport does is go through what's called an airport master planning process. We just finished ours. We just finished up about 6 months ago. They're very comprehensive. For instance, ours took about 18 months and cost about $750,000. It's very comprehensive. It goes through a variety of forecasting for activity levels, identifying facility needs, you name it. But really, that's the starting point for us to lay out our infrastructure needs. And from there, we start to develop a funding plan. Now, everyone knows there's never enough money for infrastructure. That's an ongoing talking point at every level of government. It's true at airports across the country as well. However, there are some robust programs in place, specifically at the federal level, that assist with most major infrastructure projects. For instance, the Airport Improvement Program that's run by the FAA, it's funded through user fees and jet fuel tax revenues. That provides the predominant source of our capital dollars. But I mentioned a second ago that the local governments that comprise the authority, they also contribute every year. They contribute about $4 million a year combined to contribute towards infrastructure. But there's still a gap. There's always still a gap to meet what we need to get done for infrastructure. And that's where we have the ability and the opportunity to get creative and find make sense partnerships to deliver infrastructure. And I'll talk about some of that in a second. Typical delivery methods at an airport are exactly what you'd expect. You probably see these delivery methods in your communities every single day: design, bid, build, or design, build, or construction manager at risk. We utilize all those delivery methods depending on the project and the specifics of that project. We're also, both here at Gateway Airport and across the country, it's becoming very, very popular to consider what I'll call alternative delivery methods, which can also often be referred to as public-private partnerships. Finding ways to engage the private sector in make sense situations to leverage their expertise or the private sector capital when it makes sense to get infrastructure projects done. There are examples of how this has worked very, very well, and there are examples of how this worked very poorly. So it is not for everybody, but it's becoming more and more interesting as the national airspace and airports across the country continue to realize the shortage or the infrastructure needs and the shortage of typical funds to deliver on that infrastructure, and the willingness of the private sector to step up. Now, in any investment, there should always be a return on that investment, and infrastructure is no different. At the airport, depending on the type of project, we evaluate return on investment a little bit differently. I'm going to talk in a minute about what is our most significant infrastructure project we have going on right now, which is the construction of a new air traffic control tower. And that's really a capacity building project that improves the safety of the airport, that allows the airport to handle more throughput in a more efficient way. There isn't a financial return there, but for us building this air traffic control tower, you know, other airlines aren't just magically going to show up and want to serve the airport, but it's a necessary investment. So we evaluate that in one particular way. We also work with the private sector and invest in things like roads and water, sewer, power infrastructure to drive economic development, which does have a little bit more of a direct financial impact when we evaluate that as well. I do want to point out, airports should always be considered economic engines. Sky Harbor is the largest economic engine in the state. You know, it's been a couple years since we've done it, but 3 years ago, we were spitting out about $1.3 billion in annual economic activity. That's what our owners look to when they evaluate their willingness to continue to invest in the airport authority. What are we spinning off into their various tax coffers, whether it's through visitor spending, sales tax revenues, or whatever it might be. Next slide, please. So this is a diagram of what our new air traffic controller will look like. This is a shining example of how economic development is definitely a team sport. And when it comes to funding infrastructure projects like this, we had help from the federal delegation all the way down to the local level to build political support to fund this project. It's about a $30 million project. It'll replace an existing tower that's probably 65 feet too short and has a cab that's probably 1,000 feet too small. This will be the tower we will require for the foreseeable future. So this is probably our last really sizable improvement from an air traffic control perspective. And it required, again, a significant lift from all levels. This is probably 8 to 10 years in the making from when we started talking about this project to it actually being funded. Required a federal law change, which again, our federal delegation was a big part of, and a bunch of local support to get this done. Next slide, please. This is the conceptual rendering of a development that's happening at the airport now called Skybridge, Arizona. I'm pointing this out because this is an example of how the airport's pursued what I'll call public-private partnerships or alternative delivery methods for infrastructure. We, at the airport, we were land rich, but somewhat cash poor. We knew we had a large infrastructure project to get done, which is the tower I showed you a second ago. But we didn't, outside of that, we didn't have the necessary funds to go and build additional taxiways or roads to spur economic development in this area here. That's where we engaged the private sector. So we leveraged our currency that we had, which was our land values, and worked to deal with this private developer and put the onus of delivering infrastructure on them. So far, so good. They've delivered just over 150,000 square feet of development already, and infrastructure is in design and on its way. So we're excited about the potential of our private sector partner here in bringing new jobs and new development and new infrastructure to the airport. Again, just want to reiterate, airports are extremely, extremely important economic engines. Most communities have airports either there or nearby, and I strongly recommend finding ways to work with your airports to leverage economic development. I'll happily answer any questions as we get into the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shay. Appreciate everybody's input. We have a quick poll that we're going to get to before we get to questions and answers. What do you think Arizona's largest economic hurdle? This was our first question when we started off the series, and we thought it would be most appropriate to end it with. So Tim kind of alluded to it during his presentation, but workforce, infrastructure, broadband, taxes, incentives, capital regulations, or education. Give you a second to fill that in. And I actually might just start off, one of the questions that came in was for Eric, if we can go back to the light rail map and briefly discuss planned expansion. Carrie, can we pull that back up when you get a chance? I know you're doing the polls too, so.
While she's bringing that up, let me go ahead and talk about the light rail expansion. We have two projects underway now. The most visible one is the South Central project that's extending light rail from downtown Phoenix down to Baseline Road along Central Avenue. That's due to open 2023, might slip into 2024. The other project is to extend the light rail from 19th and Dunlap out in the northwest part of Phoenix, and goes north up to the Mountain View alignment and then crosses I-17 and touches down in the Metro Center. And Metro Center, as I think most people know, a lot of those stores are closed. Maybe the whole thing is closed now. It's been sold. It's going to be major redevelopment and mixed use development. So that light rail project is, I don't think construction's started quite yet, but will soon. And then Tempe Streetcar 2, which is the circulator streetcar in Tempe, is also under construction. Another extension of the light rail from downtown Phoenix to the capital area, we call it the I-10 West extension. That's the phase 1 to the capital area. That's also due to open 2023, 2024. There are plans on the books right now to extend rail out I-10 to 79th Avenue. We are in the process right now of looking in detail at and redoing our regional transportation plan for the region. And so this map, through our discussions and work we're doing right now, is probably going to change a little bit. Obviously, the existing projects are moving forward, but there could be some variations of this as we move forward. We're also looking at bus rapid transit, which is something that we don't really have true bus rapid transit in this region. Works like light rail, but uses rubber tired buses in dedicated lanes. And so we're looking at that as perhaps in some cases, a more cost-effective solution. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Eric. Got a question for you, Shay. Are any other passenger airlines coming to coming to Gateway. Sorry, I just realized the poll ended, and looks like infrastructure might be still the number one hurdle for Arizona moving forward, which not surprising, but strong workforce and broadband are basically second. So, but sorry, back to you, Shay. Other passenger airlines coming to the Gateway.
Yeah, it's the answer is I sure hope so. We spend quite a bit of effort trying to convince airlines that Gateway is a unique opportunity to serve the Valley. I'll just share a little bit of insight as to what our strategy is there. So our predominant airline right now is Allegiant Airlines. They are a leisure airline. If you know anything about Allegiant, they do point-to-point service, typically serve markets that are not traditionally served, and they're very successful at that. They're not a business travel product. Their schedule is, they may fly out Thursday, come back Sunday. It's not a daily product by any stretch of the imagination. So we have been focused pretty solely on trying to get a legacy carrier, someone that can provide a daily service product into, so let's pick on United. We're trying to get United to consider a daily service from Gateway up to Denver and then beyond. So Denver's a hub for United. So if you live in the Southeast Valley and you travel, you get on this flight, you go to Denver and then connect beyond, and you could potentially get back same day or next day, which gives the predictability to the business traveler to fly out of Gateway. We know a lot of business travel originates out of the Southeast Valley. Right now, Sky Harbor is their best option. We feel like bringing that type of product to Gateway would be the next really big step for us as an airport. So we're always focused on that. I don't have a crystal ball as to when that'll happen. COVID has certainly thrown a curveball into the air travel industry, but we remain optimistic that that will happen someday, hopefully soon.
Thank you, Shay. I have a question for all of us. This is a good question, and I think are there statewide or regional short-range and long-range capacity planning activities going on in Arizona across all infrastructures, or do we do most of it ad hoc? And what organizations are involved? I don't know, Eric, if you want to kind of answer on the transportation, because I think it is kind of separated based on infrastructure classes, but or assets.
Yeah, you're right. As I mentioned, we're in the process of updating our regional transportation plan now, and that'll include all of Maricopa County and major portions of Pinal County. We also work with our sister agency in Casa Grande, Sun Corridor Metropolitan Planning Organization. So we have, coordinated planning, transportation planning between Pinal County and Maricopa County. And we actually extend that down into the Tucson area too. And so we have a series of computer models that help us determine kind of where traffic's going to be and kind of where we need to make investments to. Arizona Department of Transportation provides statewide planning on the highway side, and then counties and cities and towns do the planning for the local roadway systems. And
then Camilla, for at least for TDP, I know SRP is a little bit different since we don't have we don't regulate by the ACC, but how is your planning activities?
Yeah, so in terms of our infrastructure build out, we have a number of studies that we do. For example, our integrated resource plan kind of lays out how we're going to deliver electricity to our customers over the next 20 years. And that was a community-wide approach. We utilized like a community stakeholder group that involved the U of A, a lot of different types of stakeholders, SWEEP, and things like that. Additionally, we do participate in all of the planning efforts that PAG does related to transportation planning and the city's master plan, mobility master plan, right? Because these things kind of go together, right? When you put in a new road, you definitely want to make sure that you are dealing with the electrical, gas, water infrastructure all in one, so that you don't have to go back and cut up your road later. So there is definitely a level of coordination. The other thing that I'll mention, particularly related to electric vehicles, is that we, along with APS and to a certain extent SRP, we're working on a statewide transportation electrification plan that looks at opportunities and barriers around adoption and accessibility of electric vehicle infrastructure throughout the state. So that's an ongoing process, and we have a wide variety of stakeholders that are engaged in that process. Additionally, we are working with PAG and MAG on the, it's like the statewide corridor planning for electric vehicle infrastructure. So making sure that our highway corridors are EV ready.
And Tim, I know you kind of brushed on some of the stuff that the city, obviously, for your long-term planning, but obviously you have to work with several different agencies and departments to get yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the city side perspective, we work with many different partner agencies, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you say the elements are compartmentalized. So obviously with your transportation infrastructure, you have your planning agencies, our Department of Transportation being and taking a vast lead on that. But we also leverage our other organizations. So you have your Council of Governments, your Maricopa Association of Governments. We heard a few of them. NACOG is another one as well. But there's also other planning organizations too. So to go back to broadband, there is the Greater Phoenix region has a group called the Connective, where we're all looking to put together an integrated mesh network in broadband. So at the end of the day, it's all compartmentalized, but involvement and knowledge on all makes a huge difference from at least the city's perspective.
Shay, you obviously touched a little bit on yours, but there's a lot of questions in the chat box for you. So I'm just going to rattle off a couple, see if you can touch upon them. How much did your project for your new air traffic control will cost, and how long from initial planning and approval until they expect the tower to be operational?
So the project is roughly a $30 million project. That $30 million number doesn't take into account all the staff time over the last 10 years, kind of getting things primed. The initial planning for the project started again about 10 years ago, but we had some major hurdles to the funding pathway. So most of the time was spent kind of helping educate at the federal level, primarily the needs here at Gateway Airport and building federal support for that. It is a 2-year construction project. It's under construction now, so it'll be complete in the next 24 months and operational.
And then one more. As you finished your master plan prior to COVID, how flexible is the plan for COVID and post-COVID?
Oh, that's a great question. So one key point I think that we all would agree with on infrastructure is be flexible, because the market will decide really where infrastructure needed and what is needed. So yeah, our master plan was completed before COVID. It had a lot of assumptions in there about passenger traffic. We were setting records. I think we set a record every month on passenger traffic for 17 straight months. And so our forecasting at the time reflected that, not maybe as aggressive growth, but reflected growth. And then COVID hit. And just give you an example of what COVID did to our airport. The month of April, we were down 96% year over year for passenger traffic. So it basically brought passenger traffic to a halt in April. But we've steadily come back. We're one of the fastest rebounding airports in the country. And to give you an example of how we are flexible with the master plan, we have a vision that at some point, our terminal facility is on the west side of our airport today, and it's built to a certain capacity. But the long-term vision for the airport, and specifically the passenger terminal, is to build a new facility on the east side. When we finished the master plan, we thought that was within 10 years, or right about 10 years, that we would need that new facility. With now COVID impacts and the industry thinking it'll take 2 to 3 years to really get back to normal levels, our vision for that infrastructure investment is now pushed. So we're now thinking it's 10 or 15 years from now, more likely. So those are the things that you just, to the point of the question, you absolutely need to be flexible about and respond to the changing market conditions and invest the money when it's needed, and that you'll get your return on investment. Good question.
One last question for Camilla. What effect is the is the move to have all renewable power going to have on consumers and utilities with the volatility in the market, i.e. the power cost over 300 megawatts an hour? I think we saw that this summer.
Sure. I can't speak directly to the specifics of the dollar impact on a particular customer's bill. I can speak generally to when we looked at our IRP and the myriad of different scenarios related to how we were going to serve our customers. Affordability was definitely one of the factors in that consideration. As I mentioned in my presentation, affordability is definitely one of those higher ranking factors in site selection consideration. And so whenever we do put forth a rate case or any sort of changes in our resource mix, that's definitely something that's at the forefront of our mind. And while I can say, in particular, our plan calls for the early retirement of a couple of coal units, we were indeed, our rates were designed to recover on those costs over a long period of time. And so, of course, retiring them sooner changes that calculation, leaving less time to recoup on the remaining uncovered costs. And we anticipate that we will be able to mitigate the impact of those rate changes by reducing operating and capital investment costs at the units as they enter into more of like a seasonal operation and retirement. So I can't give you a direct dollar amount question, but know that affordability is definitely something that is in the forefront of everyone's minds as they contemplate changes to our resource mix and rates in the future.
Thank you. One last question for our panel's kind of departing words. What can elected officials do to advance infrastructure? Eric, do you want to go first? Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, so I think, thank you so much for attending these sessions. I think for, first and foremost, information really is the most powerful thing in terms of being an advocate for the competitive position of your community as it relates to other states and other communities. So thank you for attending, having an understanding of what it takes to really put infrastructure into the ground and the extent of the dollar amounts. I think Shay kind of, mentioned a number, and sometimes we're a little surprised by the price tag when it comes to infrastructure, but yeah, unfortunately these things are expensive. So in understanding that these things take a lot of money and they do take time and a continued investment, not just a one-time investment.
Eric, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really important that elected officials see infrastructure as long-term investments too. In this world, everybody's looking for kind of short-term benefits. Well, infrastructure isn't like that. South Mountain Freeway had been on our books since the 80s, and we finally finished it here in late 2019. That's probably an extreme example, but all these infrastructure projects take years to do the project development and to fund, and they're not inexpensive at all. Benefits are there, but infrastructure really is an investment. And if we don't do it, at least on the transportation side, you won't see the impact today or tomorrow or even next year, but 5-10 years downstream, you will, and it will hurt our economic competitiveness if we don't continue to invest in infrastructure.
Shay, your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more with Eric. The only thing I would add to that is I would encourage elected officials or their staffers to think regionally when it comes to infrastructure investment. Oftentimes, if you're just looking at your community and not how that particular piece of infrastructure fits into the regional grand scheme of things, you can underestimate or sometimes overestimate the impact of it. It's always good to come with a regional perspective and understand where your community fits and how that infrastructure assists the overall region.
And Tim, your thoughts?
Absolutely. So parting words with our elected officials, how can we advance infrastructure? Number 1 and 2, education and advocacy. So education, the League of Cities and Towns, especially for you new elected officials or oncoming, it's really important to get yourself up to speed. It's a very tough, complicated subject. The league offers wonderful training, AAD. You see training, and you've already taking steps here as well, but you don't know what you don't know. And the last most important part is advocacy. Advocate for your community. At the end of the day, we've sort of seen it this year too. Is if your community that had some stress, a lot of times there was nobody that was going to come and save you, and you can't rely on those things. Advocate and go out for your city. It's our city, it's our community, it's our region, it's our state. So that's how I can see our elected officials, really pushing infrastructure and many other things down the road.
Great. Thank you so much for everybody for participating in the panel today. Some great keys, some key wisdom that you provided to us. I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to wrap it up, but thank you all for participating.
Hey, thank you, everybody, and thank you to our panelists we had today, Tim, Eric, Shay, and Camilla. And a special thank you to SRP as our sponsor as well for this, this whole entire series. We are going to be sending out a survey, so hopefully you will fill that out. And I also, now that you're economic development champions, wanted to invite everybody to our Fall Forum 2020 in the last week of October. And that is an AAD special. It's connecting the dots, building a collaborative economy. If you use the code elected2020, you'll receive $30 off your registration as well. So be sure to register and join us for that. And again, thank you to everybody, and especially thank you to you for participating in this series. So, thank you.